I was just wondering, isn't it kind of a strange thought that limiting yourself, giving yourself these constraints, in the end makes for a better game? Because I'm kind of experiencing something similar at the moment, where when we made Islanders, we had that very tight time constraint of 4 months, and we just had to limit everything to its bare minimum to just keep it manageable. Right. Now I have as much time as I want, and I just keep adding more and more stuff to my game, which makes it clunkier and arguably less elegant in design.
Yeah.
So it's
crazy,
really
right?
strange and counterintuitive that limiting your own options makes for a better product in the end. That's so strange.
I've started to see this a ton too, because now the game dev kind of scene has exploded on YouTube and stuff. People are being a lot more visual and they're sharing a lot more of their stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see that like a lot of people do a lot of game jams, and then they start a longer project, and then they really struggle with that longer project, even though they've made dozens of game jam games. And it's because of the limitations in that game jam, right? It forces you to just get that stuff out. But the second you have all the time and all the opportunity, it's like something in our brain doesn't want to stick to constraints, right? Like suddenly we can do all this stuff.
Yeah.
We can add that other thing. We can add those extra levels, those extra factions or whatever, right? And ultimately, I think it leads to burnout for a lot of people, like because you work for so long, and the problem is sometimes the scope creeps with the progress. Sometimes the scope creeps faster than the progress, right? So it's like 6 months later, you're like, what have I done?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
It happened with Cyberpunk. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why that game is on hold. Like it, and this is a lesson I learned the hard way for sure. Like that game scoped up so much that it became unfinishable for me. Like as a solo developer, like it's just still, I love that game. I want to finish that game so bad, but I think the best design of that game is a game that I make with a team of people. I think I've got a really good vertical slice of what it should be. But what I want for that, and what I think ultimately can be commercially successful, is that big version. I think the small version could do like well, but I think it would be a different thing, right? Like it's not just a smaller version of the thing, it's like a different thing.
But isn't that kind of the trap we just talked about, that you kind of always, and this happens to me all the time as well, that you kind of think, yeah, if I just make it bigger, it will be so much better.
Right. Yes. Yes, with a caveat.
Yeah.
I have it where I want it now. But it's so like the game itself, you can play it. It's like a physical playable thing. But like the amount of work that goes around. So the game doesn't have audio. The game doesn't have any menu options. The game doesn't have any localization. The game doesn't have any kind of like all the game stuff, right? Like it's just a lot of work. I've realized kind of as a business that I'm going to need a different engine and a more collaborative kind of workspace, because if I'm just limited by Steam, okay, that's one thing. But if I want to make more money, technically I can make more money by taking the same product to multiple places rather than making more products. So Cyberpunk specifically, I have a vertical slice, but I think it needs to be in a different engine. So I think we need to make that thing in a different engine to move it to multiple places. Because I think the game translates really well to console too. Like Battleborn Tactics is a very like mouse-based game. I don't think it would work well on console. But Cyberpunk specifically, I think would work well on console. And I would love to try that.
Yeah, and I want to add that actually, I personally think that sometimes adding more content and adding more stuff to a game is actually exactly the right thing to do, right? It's not always the case that the most minimalistic version is always the best version of the game. That is not the case. There are games that kind of live off of that complexity. It's just kind of dangerous to differentiate between these different scenarios.
That was the problem with Cyberpunk, is I tried to take something like roguelikes, like Dwarf Fortress, or like these crazy ASCII games that are notoriously so complex that people can't even learn them. And I tried to make a version of it that was more accessible. And I hit the middle. I didn't hit the super accessible, elegant, because I realized that those games rely on a lot of that complexity to be fun. And sometimes, like, there's an audience out there that likes that complexity and they look for that complexity. And I was trying to translate it down. And I started to realize as I was making this game, because I was making it live on Twitch too, the people that would interact with me were the people that were after the complexity. Right. And so it was a really weird struggle for a long time of like, no, I want to make it simpler. I want to make it simpler. But like all these people, they love this complex part of it.
You were kind of pulled in two different directions there.
Yeah. And that was the other thing, dude, is like the live development of it. I didn't realize how much that got into my head. Like doing it live, I had so many voices in my head constantly, and it really messed with me a lot more than I thought it would. Like it's a whole nother deal, right? Like there's most developers have a problem with getting anybody to care at all about their thing, right?
Yeah.
That's like the vast majority of the problem, and it sucks, and that's a super hard problem to overcome. But then like once you pass the threshold, there's like a problem of like, okay, too many people trying to have a say in this thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you as a designer keep your vision of the game while you got all these people that are different player types, that are different, they want different things out of the game, right? But they all have opinions. It's weird. You guys probably experienced something in like that in Islanders, didn't you?
Yeah, for really. Islanders we experienced that. For Release Snail, I'm experiencing the exact same thing because I have a bunch of playtesters on my Discord and they just bombard me with suggestions,
very
ideas. Yeah, lots lots of good opinions as well, lots of good suggestions as well, which makes matters even worse, right?
Yeah, because then it's good opinion versus scope creep and like all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like I got so many good suggestions while I was making it. It's like that's a good suggestion. But that's a 4-week development.
Yeah.
And weighing that across the rest of the game, prioritize wise, that's at the bottom. And it's like people don't understand that. They're like, why don't you do it? Why don't you just do it? I'm just gonna type and do it. It's gonna be like, there's a lot of things in there.
You just have to make that calculation in the 4 weeks of developing that feature. How many more ideas will you get from chat, right? That calculation just doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. I'm realizing that as much as I love Twitch and as much as I love hanging out with my community, I actually design better games away from the feedback. And then I like to go in cycles. So I like to say, okay, I made a bunch of stuff offline. And then, okay, let's go very live. Let's go very public. Let's get all the feedback. And then go back offline and kind of sort through it and mess with it.
That sounds like a very healthy middle ground to me because you both get that feedback, that input, which is obviously very important, but then you get also some moments of silence where you kind of can make up your own mind and just go with what you think is right.
The moments of silence was something I didn't realize I needed. But like streaming 5 or 6 days a week and doing that game constantly, there's none of that. It was all just these voices. And they overrode my own voice in my head.